7 police cruisers surrounded my ranch, their sirens piercing the Wyoming morning like war horns, announcing doom. Through my kitchen window, I watched Lysandra Blackthorne step out of her purple Rolls-Royce, her face twisted into that particular smile reserved for those who believe they've won everything. She held her phone triumphantly, gesturing wildly at the officers as they approached my front gate. Judge Ravencroft, her voice carried across the 100 yards between us, shrill with vindication. Your reign of terror ends today. I've documented everything, the threats, the harassment, the violation of every civilized norm our community holds dear. The lead officer, a young sergeant who looked decidedly uncomfortable with this spectacle, was already reaching for his handcuffs. Behind him, 2 other officers prepared what appeared to be an arrest warrant. Lysandra's associates, she always traveled with at least 4 people in matching black suits, filmed everything on their phones. No doubt preparing content for the Celestial Gardens Estate's social media pages. I set down my coffee cup, took one last bite of my scrambled eggs, and walked calmly to meet them at the gate. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch my family had owned since 1876. Land that had survived droughts, depressions, and world wars. It would survive Lysandra Blackthorne too. Mrs. Blackthorne, I said, opening the gate with deliberate slowness. You're exactly 20 minutes too late. Her smile faltered slightly. What are you talking about, officers? Arrest this man immediately for terroristic threats against our homeowners association. I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew a document bearing the crimson seal of the state Supreme Court. The sergeant paused, his hand halfway to his cuffs. As I unfolded the paper and held it up for all to see, this is an emergency judicial order, signed at 7:42 a.m. this morning. As of 20 minutes ago, the Celestial Gardens Estates Homeowners Association Board has been dissolved by court order. You, Lysandra, no longer have any authority here or anywhere else. The color drained from her face like water from a broken dam. That's impossible. You don't have the power. Oh, but I do, I said, allowing myself the smallest smile. And you're about to learn exactly why? Sergeant, I believe you'll want to read this order very carefully, particularly Section 4. Regarding criminal investigations into HOA board members. The sergeant took the document, his eyes widening as he scanned its contents. Behind Lysandra, her associates had stopped filming, their phones hanging limply at their sides. The purple Rolls-Royce suddenly seemed less like a chariot of victory and more like an extremely expensive hearse. To understand how we arrived at this moment, how a 68-year-old retired judge brought down the most powerful HOA in Wyoming, we need to go back 6 months. Back to when I thought my biggest worry would be whether my tomatoes would survive the early frost. Before I tell you this incredible story, I want to share something with you. Every story I tell carries a lesson about standing up against injustice, about how ordinary people can fight back against those who abuse their power. If today's story inspires you to stand up for what's right, please hit that like button so more people can hear this message. And if you want to support more stories like this one, the thanks button below is always there. Every contribution helps me continue sharing these important lessons with people who need to hear them most. Thank you for being here. Now, let me tell you how a simple stone and an ancient covenant brought down a tyrant. The morning I returned to Ravencroft Ranch, the air tasted different. After 42 years of breathing courthouse dust and hearing the endless parade of human misery that flows through a courtroom, the Wyoming wind felt like absolution. I'd presided over thousands of cases, murders, frauds, corporate crimes that destroyed entire communities. Now, all I wanted was to watch the sun rise over the mountains and maybe teach my horses a new trick or two. The ranch sprawled across 127 acres of prime land, carved from the wilderness by my great-great-grandfather Josiah Ravencroft, with nothing but determination and an almost mystical connection to the earth. The nearest neighbor used to be 10 miles away. Now, the gleaming monstrosity of Celestial Gardens Estates pressed against my eastern border like a cancer in a 3-piece suit. As I walked the property line that first week, reacquainting myself with every hill and valley, I discovered something odd near the eastern corner. Half buried beneath decades of prairie grass sat a black obsidian stone about the size of a dinner plate. Carved into its surface was a symbol I'd never noticed before, an eye within a triangle, surrounded by what looked like scales of justice. The carving was old, worn smooth in places, but still clearly deliberate. I ran my fingers over the stone, remembering something my grandfather had said when I was young. That stone will protect us when the wolves come dressed as sheep. At the time, I thought it was just one of his colorful metaphors. Old ranchers were full of such sayings. I left the stone where it was and continued my walk, unaware that I'd just touched the key to everything that would follow. 3 days into my retirement, the wolves arrived. I was fixing a section of fence when I heard the distinctive purr of an overpriced engine. A purple Rolls-Royce, yes. Purple, like someone had dipped it in grape juice, rolled up my private drive. The woman who emerged looked like she'd been assembled by a committee dedicated to the concept of aggressive suburban dominance. Lysandra Blackthorne stood about 5'4" in her designer heels, with platinum blonde hair that defied both wind and reason, wearing a business suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Judge Ravencroft," she called out, flanked by 2 men in identical black suits who looked like they'd been ordered from a discount bodyguard catalog. "I'm Lysandra Blackthorne, CEO of the Celestial Gardens Estates Homeowners Association." CEO. Not president. Not chair. CEO. That should have been my first warning. She approached with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in any meaningful way. "I wanted to personally welcome you back to the neighborhood and discuss some opportunities for improving your property, Mrs. Blackthorne," I said, setting down my tools. "This ranch has been in my family for 5 generations. It doesn't need improvement." Her smile tightened imperceptibly. "Oh, but surely you want to be a good neighbor. Your property is visible from our community. We have certain standards that ensure everyone's investment is protected." She produced a book. Calling it a book isn't an exaggeration. Bound in leather with gold lettering, Celestial Gardens Community Standards and Regulations. The thing must have weighed 5 pounds. Page 247 outlines the requirements for properties adjacent to our community, she said, as if she'd memorized every word. "Your current fencing is non-compliant. Those rustic wooden posts need to be replaced with approved materials. The color of your barn violates Section 18. S. 2, regarding acceptable earth tones. And that collection of vintage vehicles are on my property, which is not part of your HOA." I interrupted. Her smile grew, and something in her eyes reminded me of prosecutors I'd seen who thought they had an airtight case. "Technically true, but our regulations extend to any property that impacts our community's aesthetic harmony. It's all perfectly legal." That's when she said something that made my instincts prickle like a horse sensing a rattlesnake. "This ranch has such special potential, Judge. There are opportunities here you can't even imagine. It would be a shame to let stubbornness stand in the way of progress." After she left, I found one of her associates photographing the old family cemetery in the corner of my property. When I confronted him, he claimed he was documenting historical features. But the way he focused on the ground rather than the headstones suggested he was interested in something else entirely. That evening, my nearest neighbor within Celestial Gardens, a Russian man named Dmitry Volkov, appeared at my gate. He was a thin, nervous man who kept looking over his shoulder as if Lysandra might materialize from the sagebrush. "Judge," he said quietly, "I need to warn you. You're not the first rancher she's targeted. 5 others owned land along this border. All of them are gone now. Gone? Forced to sell. Buried under fines. Lawsuits. Constant harassment. She has a system, and it works." He leaned closer. "There are rumors about why she wants this land so badly. Be careful." The war began the next morning. The first violation notice arrived via certified mail. According to Lysandra, my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. There were, apparently, 17 approved shades of black in the Celestial Gardens palette. Mine was shade number 18, unauthorized midnight. The fine was $500. I might have laughed if it hadn't been followed by 6 more violations that same week. My driveway gravel exceeded the maximum allowable size by 2 millimeters. The sound of my rooster crowing violated sonic harmony standards. My 1950 Ford pickup, parked behind my own barn on my own property, was guilty of aesthetic terrorism. By the end of the first month, I'd accumulated over $15 in fines for violations ranging from the absurd to the impossible. One notice fined me $1 because a tree branch was growing in a pattern that didn't conform to natural aesthetic guidelines. Another claimed my horses were the wrong color to be visible from the road. But it wasn't just the fines. Every morning, drones appeared over my property, buzzing like mechanical wasps as they photographed every inch of my land. Security vehicles from Celestial Gardens began patrolling the road that bordered my ranch, spotlights sweeping across my fields at all hours of the night. My sleep became fractured. interrupted by the constant surveillance. The psychological warfare was precisely calculated. Every trip to the mailbox brought new fines. Every project I started was met with immediate violations. When I repaired a fence section, I was fined for using nails that weren't on the approved fastener list. When I planted a garden, I received notice that my tomatoes were positioned in a pattern that violated geometric harmony standards. 3 months into this siege, something darker emerged from the pattern of harassment. The drones weren't just documenting violations, they were mapping my property with the kind of precision usually reserved for geological surveys. The security patrols always lingered longest near the northeast section of my ranch, where the old mine shafts from the 1890s had been sealed decades ago. Late one night, unable to sleep from the constant spotlight sweeps, I retrieved my grandfather's journals from the attic. He'd been meticulous about documenting the ranch's history, and somewhere in those yellowed pages, I hoped to find ammunition for my battle with Lysandra. What I found instead changed everything. Tucked between entries about cattle prices and rainfall measurements was a letter dated 1943. It was from a government geologist, marked confidential, discussing the results of a wartime mineral survey. The language was technical, but the meaning was clear. Beneath Ravencroft Ranch lay a deposit of something called helium-3, a rare isotope that the letter described as strategically significant for future technologies. My grandfather had written in the margin, they wanted to buy the mineral rights for $500. I told them no, the stone protects what lies beneath. Suddenly, Lysandra's interest in my land made terrible sense. This wasn't about property values or aesthetic standards, this was about hundreds of millions of dollars in rare minerals, and I was the only thing standing between her and that fortune. But knowing her motive didn't stop her escalation. If anything, it intensified. The security patrols became more aggressive, sometimes accidentally damaging my fence so they could document the safety hazard. My mail began arriving, opened, resealed with tape. Mysterious calls came at all hours, hanging up when I answered. Classic intimidation tactics, but executed with a suburban soccer mom's attention to detail. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been in the barn, tending to my horses, when I heard frantic whinnying from the pasture, racing outside. I found 3 of my horses down, convulsing. The vet who arrived within the hour was baffled. The symptoms suggested poisoning, but he couldn't identify the substance. By morning, all 3 were dead. Thunder, lightning, and Sage, horses I'd raised from foals, who trusted me completely. The vet found traces of an exotic compound in their blood, something that would have required specialized knowledge to obtain and administer. This wasn't an accident, he told me quietly. Someone wanted these animals to suffer, standing over their graves. Something cold and determined crystallized in my chest. For 42 years, I'd upheld the law from behind a bench. I'd played by the rules, trusted the system, but Lysandra Blackthorne had just taught me that sometimes the system itself becomes the weapon. That night, as drones buzzed overhead and spotlights swept across the ranch, I made a decision. I walked to the eastern corner of my property and knelt beside the obsidian stone. For the first time in decades, I whispered the words my grandfather had taught me. By the covenant of judges, by the oath of protectors, I invoke the old agreement. The stone felt warm under my palm, which was impossible. It had been sitting in the cold ground all day. But as I spoke those words, I could have sworn it pulsed with life. I returned to my study and began composing an email. Not to local authorities, Lysandra had too many connections there. Instead, I reached out to a name I'd discovered in my grandfather's papers, Judge Octavia Grimm, listed as the current Keeper of the Covenant in something called the Order of Sentinel Judges. Within an hour, I received a response. We've been waiting for your call. Brother Ravencroft, the order remembers its own. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, not another drone or security patrol, but a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes. Seraphina Cross introduced herself as the former vice president of the Celestial Gardens HOA board. I need to tell you what you're really fighting, she said, glancing nervously at the sky, as if drones might be listening. It's worse than you know. She pulled out a flash drive, her hands shaking. Lysandra discovered the helium-3 deposits 2 years ago. Her late husband worked for Kronos Industries. They specialize in rare mineral extraction. When he died, she inherited his shares and his ambitions. The flash drive contained a treasure trove of evidence, emails between Lysandra and Kronos executives discussing Project Ravencroft, falsified HOA voting records showing how she'd manipulated elections to stack the board with her allies. Financial documents revealing that HOA funds had been diverted to pay for geological surveys of my land. She's already secured preliminary extraction rights. Serafina continued. All she needs is your land. The HOA was never about property values. It's a weapon designed to force you out. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Her face hardened. Because when I objected to her methods, she destroyed my life. Fines. Liens. Constant harassment. My husband left me. My children won't speak to me because she convinced them I was unstable. I've lost everything to that woman. As Serafina spoke, I began to understand the true scope of Lysandra's operation. This wasn't just about my ranch. She'd systematically targeted every property along the mineral deposit. Using the HOA as a quasi-legal extortion racket, 5 ranchers had already fallen, selling their land for pennies on the dollar, just to escape the nightmare. There's more, Serafina said, her voice dropping. 3 families who resisted too strongly just disappeared. Officially, they moved away suddenly. But nobody knows where they went. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. This had escalated far beyond property disputes. We were dealing with someone who saw human lives as obstacles to profit, who wielded bureaucracy like a weapon of mass destruction. That afternoon, I received another violation notice. This one was different. Instead of citing some absurd infraction, it simply stated, "Your continued non-compliance forces us to escalate to final measures. You have 48 hours to contact us regarding voluntary property transfer, or we will proceed with Plan B." Attached was a photo of my grandchildren, taken at their school in Denver. The implied threat shattered my resolve to handle this through normal channels. Lysandra had just crossed a line from which there was no return. She thought she was dealing with a feeble old man who would crumble under pressure. She was about to learn what 42 years of dealing with the worst of humanity had taught me about justice. The photo of my grandchildren changed everything. In my years on the bench, I'd seen criminals use many tactics, but threatening children crossed into territory that demanded immediate and decisive action. I placed the photo in my safe and made 2 phone calls. The first was to my son in Denver, telling him to keep the children home from school for a few days. The second was to Judge Octavia Grimm. She's escalated to threatening family members. I told her. There was a long pause before Octavia responded. Then it's time you learned the full truth about the Sentinel judges. Brother Ravencroft, can you be in Cheyenne tonight? 6 hours later, I sat in a conference room that officially didn't exist, in a building that appeared on no government directory. Octavia Grimm looked nothing like her name suggested. She was a small woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. But when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. The Order of Sentinel Judges was founded in 1823. She began, sliding a leather-bound book across the table. Your great-great-grandfather Josiah was one of the founding members. They foresaw a time when the law itself might be weaponized against the innocent. The book contained names, dates, and cases spanning 2 centuries. Judges who had used their positions not just to interpret law, but to actively protect communities from those who would abuse legal systems for profit and power. The obsidian stones were placed as markers and keys. Octavia continued. Each one grants emergency jurisdiction to any judge of the order when specific conditions are met. Corruption of local governance. Clear and present danger to the community. And documented evidence of systematic abuse of legal process. You're saying I can dissolve her HOA? More than that. The Sentinel Covenant grants you temporary oversight of all legal matters within a 50-mile radius when activated. It's a nuclear option, created for exactly this kind of situation. She leaned forward. But you'll need irrefutable evidence, the kind that would make any reviewing court uphold your actions without question. I thought of Serafina's flash drive, of the threatened families, of my dead horses. I can get it, but I'll need her to confess publicly. Octavia smiled for the first time. Then you'll need to make her believe she's already won. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. Lysandra's weakness was her ego. Her absolute certainty that money and intimidation would always triumph. We would use that certainty to destroy her. I returned to the ranch and did something that must have delighted Lysandra to her core. I began violating every single HOA rule in the most visible way possible. I painted my barn door bright orange. I parked 3 more vintage vehicles in front of my property. I erected a 20-foot sign that read, "Lysandra Blackthorne is a criminal," in letters visible from the road. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Within hours, her purple Rolls-Royce was speeding up my drive. Followed by 2 SUVs full of her black-suited associates, she emerged practically vibrating with rage and triumph. "You finally lost your mind," she shrieked, gesturing at the sign. "This is defamation, harassment, terroristic threats against our community." I stood on my porch, affecting my best unhinged elderly man demeanor. "You killed my horses? You threatened my grandchildren. I'll destroy your entire organization." "Perfect." She whirled to face her associates, all of whom were filming with their phones. "You all heard that. Direct threats against the HOA. This is going straight to the police and our lawyers." For the next hour, I gave her exactly what she wanted, seemingly deranged rants about bringing down her HOA, vague threats about knowing judges who would help me, claims that I had evidence that would ruin her. Her smile grew wider with every word, probably already calculating how she'd use this footage. "The emergency HOA meeting is tomorrow night," she announced as she prepared to leave. "Every resident will see exactly who you really are. And then, Judge Ravencroft, you'll be leaving this ranch either in handcuffs or a moving van. Your choice." As her convoy departed, I noticed something interesting. One of her associates had remained behind, pretending to check something on his phone while actually photographing the areas where our geological surveys indicated the richest helium-3 deposits. They weren't even trying to hide their intentions anymore. That night, I prepared for war, not with weapons or threats, but with something far more dangerous: the truth, properly deployed. I compiled every piece of evidence Serafina had provided, added my own documentation of the harassment campaign, and created a presentation that would play automatically on my phone when triggered. I also placed calls to 5 specific individuals who Dmitry Volkov had quietly identified as fellow victims of Lysandra's reign. Each had suffered under her arbitrary rules and mysterious fines. Each had lost something precious to her greed. They all agreed to attend the emergency meeting. The morning of the confrontation, Judge Grimm called with final instructions. "The emergency order is prepared and signed, waiting only for my electronic verification. The moment you have her confession on record, send me the signal. You'll have exactly 30 minutes before she can call for help." "What about the police?" "She'll call 911 immediately." "Let her. Sheriff Morrison has been briefed. He's the grandson of one of the original Covenant members. The law takes care of its own." Cassius. The Celestial Gardens Community Center was packed beyond capacity that night. News of my breakdown had spread through the HOA like wildfire, and everyone wanted to witness the final destruction of the stubborn judge who dared defy their queen. The room hummed with anticipation, and no small amount of fear. Many residents knew that crossing Lysandra meant becoming her next target. She'd arranged the room like a courtroom, with herself elevated on a platform at the front, flanked by her board members like a judicial panel. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wore a red power suit that probably cost more than most residents' monthly mortgage payments. Her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "As you know, we've been dealing with a serious threat to our community's safety and values. Judge Ravencroft has escalated his antisocial behavior to dangerous levels." The lights dimmed as she began her presentation. The video of my rants played on a massive screen, carefully edited to remove any context. She'd even added ominous music. The crowd gasped at appropriate moments, though I noticed several residents looking uncomfortable rather than convinced. "This man," Lysandra continued, "has terrorized our community with his refusal to comply with basic standards. He's threatened me personally, threatened the board, and now threatens all of you with his promise to destroy our organization." Well, I say enough is enough. The crowd murmured agreement, but it sounded forced. Fear, not conviction, motivated their response. "I motion for an immediate vote," she announced, "to ban Cassius Ravencroft from any interaction with our community and to authorize all necessary legal action to protect ourselves from his threats." This was my moment. I stood slowly, letting every eye in the room focus on me. "Before you vote," I said calmly, my voice carrying the authority of 4 decades on the bench, "I think everyone here deserves to know what they're really voting for." "Sit down," Lysandra commanded. "You have no right to speak here." "Oh, but I do." I pulled out my phone. "You see, Lysandra, you're not the only one who's been recording conversations." The blood drained from her face as I connected my phone to the room's audio system, a feature she'd probably forgotten existed in her own building. The first recording began to play. Lysandra's voice, crystal clear, discussing with Kronos Industries executives how to force me off my land. "The old fool has no idea what's under his property. 300 million in helium-3. Just waiting for extraction. The HOA fines are working perfectly. He'll crack within 6 months." The room erupted in shocked whispers. I played the next recording. Lysandra instructing her security team to accidentally poison my horses. Make it look natural. Something that can't be traced. 3 dead horses should send the right message. Gasps of horror filled the room. Several residents stood to leave. But Lysandra's associates blocked the exits. Those are fabricated, she screamed. Deep fakes, he's trying to... I played the 3rd recording. The one that destroyed any remaining credibility she had. It was from a board meeting she thought was private, where she laughed about the families she'd driven away. The Johnsons were easy. A few liens. Some late-night visits from security, and they practically begged to sell. 20 cents on the dollar for land worth millions. The same formula works every time. But the killing blow came from Serafina Cross, who stood up in the middle of the crowd. Everything he's saying is true. I was vice president of this board. I watched Lysandra steal HOA funds, falsify votes, and destroy anyone who opposed her. I have the receipts. She held up a thick folder of documents. Bank transfers to private geology firms, emails planning the harassment campaigns, proof that she's been using the HOA as a criminal enterprise. The room descended into chaos. Residents began shouting questions, demanding answers. Some tried to leave, but now they wanted to stay and hear more. Lysandra's carefully controlled kingdom was crumbling in real time. You want to know the truth? Lysandra suddenly screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. Fine, yes. I've been working to acquire that land. Do you have any idea what's under that worthless ranch? Helium-3, the future of energy. $300 million that doddering old fool is sitting on like a hen on eggs. She whirled to face the crowd, her eyes wild. I did what needed to be done. I created value. I brought organization to chaos. Every single thing I did was perfectly legal within the HOA bylaws that you all agreed to, including threatening my grandchildren? I asked quietly. You wouldn't sell, she shrieked. 5 years of planning, millions in investments, and you wouldn't just take the money and leave. So yes, I was prepared to do whatever it took. That's what leaders do. They make the hard choices. The silence that followed her confession was deafening. Even her own board members stepped away from her. Recognition dawning that they'd been accomplices to something far darker than they'd realized. I sent a single text to Judge Grimm. Now, Lysandra, perhaps sensing the shift in the room's energy, pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. This is an illegal gathering. You're all trespassing. 911 will hear about this terrorist threatening our community. She dialed frantically, screaming into the phone about immediate danger, threats of violence, requesting every available unit. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, tears streaming down her face as she described how a deranged judge was inciting a riot against lawful community leadership. They're coming, she announced triumphantly. Every cop in the county will be here in minutes. You think your little recordings matter? I have the best lawyers in the state. I'll bury every one of you in litigation for the rest of your miserable lives. True to her word, we soon heard sirens approaching. Multiple sirens. The residents grew nervous, some edging toward exits. Lysandra's smile returned, sharp and predatory. You see, the law is on my side. It always has been. Money writes the laws. Judge, I thought you'd have learned that after 40 years on the bench, the community center doors burst open. Sheriff Morrison entered, followed by 6 deputies, but also with them was someone Lysandra hadn't expected. Judge Octavia Grimm herself, holding an official court document. Lysandra Blackthorne, Sheriff Morrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of generational justice. You're under arrest for extortion, criminal conspiracy, theft by deception, and terroristic threatening. What? Lysandra's voice cracked. No, I called you. He's the criminal. Arrest him. Judge Grimm stepped forward. Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm here to serve you with an emergency judicial order. As of 7:42 p.m. tonight, the Celestial Gardens Estates Homeowners Association has been dissolved by order of the state Supreme Court, acting under the authority of the Sentinel Covenant of 1823. She held up the document for all to see. Furthermore, all HOA assets are frozen pending criminal investigation. All fines, liens, and penalties issued by this organization are hereby vacated, and you, specifically, are subject to an immediate restraining order preventing you from coming within 1,000 feet of any former resident. Lysandra's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, staring at the document as if it were written in an alien language. This isn't possible. The Sentinel what? That's not real law. Oh. But it is, I said, stepping forward. You see, Lysandra, While you were studying HOA bylaws and mineral rights, you missed something crucial. The land you've been trying to steal has been under special protection since 1823. The Sentinel judges were created to prevent exactly what you've been doing, using the law as a weapon against the innocent. Judge Grimm continued the legal destruction. Your confession tonight, witnessed by over 200 people and recorded on multiple devices, provides more than sufficient grounds for criminal prosecution. Sheriff Morrison, please proceed with the arrest. As the deputies approached with handcuffs, Lysandra made a one last desperate play. You don't understand. Kronos Industries has invested millions. They'll destroy all of you. This isn't over. Actually, Sheriff Morrison said as he secured the handcuffs, it is. Kronos Industries was raided by the FBI this morning. Turns out your emails to them included evidence of interstate fraud and conspiracy. They're rather eager to cooperate in exchange for leniency. The sight of Lysandra Blackthorne being led away in handcuffs while wearing her red power suit was poetry in motion. The residents watched in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of their world in the span of an hour. After the police left, I addressed the shell-shocked crowd. You're free now, all of you. No more arbitrary fines. No more living in fear of violation notices. Your homes are yours again. An elderly veteran in the back row began to clap slowly. Others joined him, and soon the entire room erupted in applause. People were crying, hugging, releasing years of pent-up fear and frustration. Dmitry Volkov approached me with tears in his eyes. Judge, I can finally put up my grandmother's bird feeders again. You don't know what this means. But the evening wasn't quite over. Serafina Cross stood before the crowd, holding the folder of evidence. There's more work to be done. We need to account for every penny that was stolen, every family that was driven away. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about making the victims whole. The dissolution of the HOA happened with stunning efficiency. Within a week, forensic accountants had uncovered the full scope of Lysandra's embezzlement. She diverted over $2 million in HOA funds to finance her mineral rights scheme. The money was recovered and returned to residents who'd paid illegal fines. The 3 families who'd disappeared were located. They'd been threatened and paid to relocate, signing NDAs that Lysandra thought would keep them silent forever. Those agreements were nullified by the criminal nature of the conspiracy, and each family received substantial settlements from the frozen assets. Lysandra's trial became a sensation in legal circles. The Sentinel Covenant, dormant for decades, was suddenly being studied in law schools across the country. Legal scholars debated whether such emergency powers should exist, but none could deny their effectiveness in this case. She was ultimately convicted on 47 separate counts, including racketeering charges that treated the HOA as a criminal organization. The judge, one of my former colleagues who took particular pleasure in the assignment, sentenced her to 25 years in federal prison. Your abuse of legal structures to terrorize a community represents a fundamental betrayal of civilized society, he said during sentencing. You turned what should have been a simple neighborhood organization into a weapon of extortion and fear. This court hopes your sentence serves as a warning to others who might contemplate similar schemes. The irony of her imprisonment location wasn't lost on anyone. She was assigned to maintain the grounds at the Federal Correctional Institution, essentially becoming the groundskeeper she'd once fined others for not being. 3 months after that chaotic night, Ravencroft Ranch looked different. Not physically. The barn was still its original, weathered red, the fences still honest wood and wire, but the eastern border now hosted something new. The Celestial Community Garden, where former HOA victims grew vegetables and children played without fear of violation notices. Dmitry Volkov had indeed put up his grandmother's bird feeders, 17 of them, in direct violation of what would have been Section 23. Woo. 8 of the now defunct HOA handbook. Birds of every variety flocked to them, their songs replacing the mechanical buzz of surveillance drones. Serafina Cross headed the Victim Restitution Committee, ensuring every family received what they were owed. She'd also started a nonprofit legal aid society specifically to help people fighting HOA abuse. Never again, she told me over coffee one morning. No one should have to lose everything to a petty tyrant with a rulebook. The helium-3 deposits remain safely underground. The state legislature, prompted by the scandal, passed new laws protecting agricultural land from predatory mineral extraction. My ranch will stay in the family, passed down to grandchildren who can visit without fear. The obsidian stone still sits in the eastern corner of my property, its carved symbol worn but visible. Sometimes I walk out there at sunset, running my fingers over the ancient markings. The Order of Sentinel Judges has returned to the shadows, waiting for the next time justice needs defenders willing to stand against those who would corrupt the law for profit. But the most satisfying development came 6 months later. I received a letter from the federal prison where Lysandra was serving her sentence. Not from her. She was prohibited from contacting any of her victims. The letter was from the warden, including a photograph that made me laugh until tears came. It showed Lysandra in orange prison coveralls, pushing a lawnmower across the prison grounds. In the background, barely visible, was a small sign: grass height must not exceed 3 inches. Violation will result in loss of privileges. The warden's note was brief. Judge Ravencroft, thought you'd appreciate knowing that inmate Blackthorn has become quite meticulous about lawn maintenance. She measures the grass height twice daily and has never received a single violation. Rehabilitation takes many forms. I framed that photo. It hangs in my study next to my law degree and a picture of my horses, the ones who survived and the 3 who didn't. It serves as a reminder that justice, real justice, sometimes comes in the most poetic forms. These days, I spend my mornings tending to my tomatoes and training the new horses. The ranch is peaceful, filled with the sounds that have echoed across this land for generations. Wind through grass, horses neighing, birds singing from Dimitri's feeders. No drones, no spotlights, no violation notices. Sometimes former Celestial Gardens residents stop by to share their own stories of liberation. The elderly veteran got his American flag back up and lights it proudly every night. The young couple with children turned their front yard into a playground that would have violated 17 different HOA rules. The community, freed from Lysandra's tyranny, has become what neighborhoods should be, places where people support each other instead of reporting each other. The purple Rolls-Royce was auctioned to pay restitution. I heard it was bought by a collector who specializes in infamous vehicles. It sits in a museum now, with a placard explaining its role in one of the most extensive HOA fraud schemes in American history. As for me, I learned something valuable in my first year of retirement. The law isn't just what's written in books or enforced in courtrooms. Sometimes it's a covenant written in stone, protected by generations of judges who understood that justice requires guardians. Sometimes it's neighbors standing together against a common threat, and sometimes it's an old judge with dirt under his fingernails, refusing to let a tyrant win. The Sentinel Covenant has been updated for the modern age. New stones have been placed. New judges sworn to the order. They wait and watch. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Until the moment when someone weaponizes the law against the innocent, then they remember their oath, invoke their authority, and remind the world that justice isn't just a concept, it's a living force that protects those who cannot protect themselves. My grandfather was right. The stone did protect us when the wolves came dressed as sheep, or in this case, when they came dressed in designer suits driving purple Rolls-Royces, armed with rule books instead of rifles. Every sunset, I sit on my porch and watch the sky paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch stretches out before me, unchanged, despite Lysandra's best efforts to steal it. In the distance, I can hear children playing in the community garden, their laughter carried on the Wyoming wind. This is what victory sounds like. Not sirens or gavels or prison doors slamming shut. Just free people, living free lives on free land. No longer afraid of the next violation notice, or the next knock on the door. The HOA queen built her kingdom on fear and greed. She never understood that real power comes from protecting others, not exploiting them. In the end, she got exactly what she wanted: complete control over a piece of property. It just happens to be a 6x8 cell instead of a ranch worth millions. As for that helium-3, it's still there, sleeping beneath centuries of family history. Maybe someday technology will advance to the point where it can be extracted without destroying the land above it. When that day comes, the decision will belong to my grandchildren, raised with the values of stewardship rather than strip mining. But I suspect they'll make the same choice I did. The same choice my grandfather made. The same choice Josiah Ravencroft made when he first set that obsidian stone in place. Some things are worth more than money. Land that's been loved and tended for generations. Communities where neighbors help instead of harm. Justice that protects the weak from the strong. These are the treasures that matter. And they're protected by more than just laws or covenants or ancient stones. They're protected by ordinary people who refuse to bow to tyrants, no matter how many rules they write or fines they issue. The war is over. The queen has fallen. The kingdom of fear has crumbled. And on a ranch in Wyoming, an old judge grows his tomatoes in peace, knowing that sometimes the greatest victory is simply being able to live free on your own land, answering to no one but the sunset and the turning of the seasons. Remember, friends, sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning. It's winning so completely that your enemy ends up maintaining the very standards they once used as weapons against others. Justice, when properly served, has a sense of humor all its own. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Lysandra's arrest, I received an unexpected visitor. A black sedan pulled up my drive, and out stepped a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. My first instinct was to reach for my phone. Had Kronos Industries sent another corporate vulture? But when he introduced himself, I nearly dropped my coffee cup. Judge Ravencroft, I'm Theodore Blackthorne, Lysandra's son. The resemblance was unmistakable once he said it. The same sharp cheekbones, the same intense eyes. But where Lysandra's gaze had been predatory, his held something else entirely. Shame. Before you call the sheriff, he said quickly, I'm here to apologize, and to give you something that belongs to your family. We sat on the porch, the same spot where I'd watched his mother's empire crumble. Theodore was nothing like her, soft-spoken, thoughtful, carrying the weight of a surname that had become synonymous with corruption. I never knew what she was really doing, he said, staring at his hands. She told me the HOA was about maintaining standards, protecting investments. I was away at law school during the worst of it. When I found out, he shook his head. I've spent the last year trying to make amends to everyone she hurt. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a small wooden box, worn with age. I found this in her personal safe. I think she took it from your property years ago. Inside the box was another obsidian stone, smaller than the one on my property, but carved with similar symbols. But this one had additional markings, coordinates etched in tiny numbers around the edge. My hands trembled as I recognized my grandfather's craftsmanship. There's a letter too, Theodore added, handing me a yellowed envelope. The letter was dated 1943, written in my grandfather's careful script. To my descendants, if you're reading this, then both stones have been united in a time of great need. The first stone marks our boundary and protects our land. The second stone marks something far more valuable. Follow the coordinates not to treasure, but to truth. The real covenant isn't just about law, it's about ensuring that those who seek power through cruelty find only justice. May you use this knowledge wisely. Theodore stood to leave, but paused at his car. Judge Ravencroft, my mother still doesn't understand what she did wrong. She writes letters from prison about how unfair it all is, how she was just a businesswoman trying to maximize value. But I wanted you to know that not all Blackthorns think that way. Some of us understand that community isn't about control, it's about connection. After he left, I studied the coordinates on the stone. They led to a spot in the mountains, on public land about 20 miles from the ranch. Dmitri Volkov and Serafina Cross insisted on coming with me when I decided to investigate. What we found there changed everything we thought we knew about the Sentinel judges. Hidden in a natural cave was a repository, hundreds of documents dating back to the 1820s, records of every time the Covenant had been invoked, every corrupt official brought down, every community saved from those who would exploit the law for gain. My family weren't just members, they were the archivists, the keepers of this secret history. But the most shocking discovery was a ledger from 1962. In it, we found an entry about Lysandra's grandfather, Magnus Blackthorne. He had tried to buy mineral rights across Wyoming through intimidation and forged documents. The Sentinel judges had stopped him, stripping him of his wealth and influence. The man had died, bitter and broken, passing his rage and greed down through generations like a poisoned inheritance. Lysandra hadn't just been trying to steal my land. She'd been trying to avenge her family's disgrace, to prove that a Blackthorne could beat the system that had defeated her grandfather. The cycles of greed and justice, playing out across generations like a bizarre generational chess match. We sealed the cave back up, but not before I added a new entry to the ledger, documenting Lysandra's attempt and defeat. The Sentinel judges' work would continue, their history preserved for future generations who might need to invoke the Covenant. As we drove back to the ranch, Serafina asked the question we were all thinking. Do you think Theodore knows about his family's history with the Covenant? I remembered the look in his eyes, the weight he carried. I think he suspects, and I think that's why he brought me the stone. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't fighting injustice, it's acknowledging when your own family is on the wrong side of it. The sun was setting as we returned to Ravencroft Ranch, painting the sky in shades of justice and redemption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to communities across the country, but tonight, we had proof that the Watchers still watch, the Protectors still protect, and that greed, no matter how carefully planned or ruthlessly executed, eventually meets its match in those willing to stand for what's right. The second obsidian stone now sits next to the first, two sentinels guarding not just land but legacy, and somewhere in a federal prison, Lysandra Blackthorne measures grass height to exactly 3 inches. Never knowing that her obsession with control was inherited from a grandfather who met the same justice she now serves. The cycles continue, but so does the covenant. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all.